Hello, dear dreamer. I'm so glad you're here tonight. This is your moment to set aside the weight of the day. Let your mind grow still and let a story carry you gently toward rest. So, make yourself comfortable, breathe deeply, and listen as we step into a tale. Soft, timeless, and full of quiet wonder. Tonight's story is not the one you've heard 100 times before. You may know the tale of Sleeping Beauty, the princess who fell into an enchanted sleep, and the fairies who blessed her cradle. But this time we will not follow the princess, nor the prince who comes to wake her. Instead, we'll listen to the voice of the fairy who was never invited to the royal celebration. Some call her wicked, some call her cursed, but perhaps she was simply forgotten, and in that forgetting her heart grew heavy. This is the story of the uninvited fairy, a story of loneliness, pride, and a longing to belong. The great hall of the kingdom was alive with music. Golden banners swayed in the breeze, candles flickered from tall chandeliers, and nobles whispered in admiration of the king and queen's newborn daughter. Every fairy of the land had been summoned to give their blessing. Every fairy, that is, except one. Far beyond the glittering walls of the castle, in a shadowed glen where the sunlight rarely reached, a fairy sat alone. Her name was scarcely spoken in polite company. Some said she chose the shadows, others that the shadows chose her. But what mattered most to her was not the whispers, it was the silence of never being called, never being welcomed. She had once stood among the others, wings bright, heart eager to serve. But over time, invitations grew fewer, then stopped altogether. And when news of the royal child's christening reached her ears, with promises of feasts, music, and blessings from all the fairies of the realm, her name was absent again. The fairy rose from her chair of twisted roots, her gown brushing the forest floor like a ripple of midnight. Bitterness swelled in her chest, mingled with hurt she would not name. She had not asked for riches nor honor. She had only wished for her place among them. And so, with a slow and steady breath, she whispered into the wind, "If they do not wish to remember me, then I shall make myself unforgettable." With that, she spread her dark, glimmering wings and stepped into the night. The castle glowed like a lantern in the heart of the kingdom. Music spilled from its high windows, laughter tumbled down its stone steps, and the air itself seemed sweet with joy. Inside, nobles gathered shoulder to shoulder, craning their necks to see the row of fairies as each stepped forward to bless the royal child. One gave beauty, another gave song, another bestowed the gift of kindness. Sparkles of magic drifted like golden dust across the cradle where the baby slept, blissfully unaware of the eyes watching her. The king and queen beamed, bowing their heads in thanks as each fairy took her turn. And then the doors of the great hall thundered open. The music faltered. Candles flickered as a gust of wind rushed inside. And there, framed by the glow of the torches, stood the uninvited fairy. Her gown shimmered with shadows, her wings like dark glass catching the light. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent. Whispers began to spread like fire through dry leaves. She came. The queen clutched her child closer. The king stiffened, his knuckles white against the throne. The fairy walked forward, her steps slow and deliberate. She was not hurried, nor was she ashamed. If she had been forgotten, then she would remind them. If she had been cast aside, then she would show them she still had power. Every gaze followed her as she reached the cradle. She looked down at the baby, small and innocent, her lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. For a moment she hesitated. There was no hatred in her heart for the child, only a sting, sharp and endless, for the way she herself had been overlooked. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft. "I was not invited," she said, and her words echoed in the stunned silence of the hall. And as the final fairy stepped forward with her blessing still unspoken, everyone waited to see what she would do next. The air in the hall grew heavy, as if even the walls leaned closer to hear what she would say. The other fairies shifted uneasily, their wings trembling in the torchlight. Some wanted to protest, to shield the cradle with their magic, but none dared speak first. The uninvited fairy gazed down at the child. She was beautiful, rosy cheeks, tiny hands curled into fists, lashes fluttering against her soft skin. This child had done her no harm. She had only been born into a world that celebrated some and cast others aside. The fairy's chest ached. She thought of the days she had waited for a messenger that never came, of the empty invitations, of the way her name had been erased from gatherings where once she had been honored. Her voice, when it finally came, was laced with sorrow beneath its sharpness. "They call me bitter," she whispered, though her words filled the vast hall. But what is bitterness, if not sweetness, left to rot, untended and unwanted? Gasps rippled through the crowd. The queen pressed her lips tight. The king took a step forward as though to stop her, but the fairy raised her hand, and silence fell once more. "I will not harm her," she continued, "but let this kingdom remember that forgetting comes with a price. You may ignore me today, but one day this child will know my shadow." Her hand hovered above the cradle, dark light pooling in her palm. On her 16th birthday she shall prick her finger on the spindle of a spinning wheel, and in that moment she shall fall into a sleep so deep it will feel like death itself. The hall erupted in cries. Mothers clutched their children. The king shouted for guards. But the fairy only lowered her hand, her expression unreadable. She had not spoken of hatred, She had not wished for destruction. She had woven her pain into a spell of sleep and reminder etched into destiny itself. And as she turned to leave, the hall trembled with the weight of her words. The hall was chaos. Nobles shouted in fear. Guards scrambled with their swords drawn, though none dared strike at a fairy. The queen's cry echoed as she clutched her infant daughter, rocking her as though motion could protect her from destiny. But amid the storm of voices, one fairy, draped in robes of pale silver, stepped forward. She was the youngest of them, her wings bright with morning light. Her face, though troubled, held a kind of calmness, as if she had expected this moment. She bowed low before the king and queen. "Fear not," she said softly, though her words carried through the hall. "I cannot undo what has been spoken. The magic of a vow once bound is stronger than mine, but I can soften it." The crowd hushed. Even the uninvited fairy lifted her head, her dark eyes narrowing with quiet interest. The silver-winged fairy lifted her wand, glowing faintly like a star in dawn's first light. "Her child shall indeed prick her finger, and she shall indeed fall into a sleep. But let it not be death. Let her slumber be deep, yet let her heart beat still. She shall not fade into dust, nor pass into shadows. She shall sleep until love itself comes to awaken her." A sigh swept through the hall. Relief and sorrow mingled as one. The queen wept openly, kissing her child's brow. The king closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging, clinging to hope. But the uninvited fairy stood motionless. For a long moment she looked upon the silver-winged fairy, upon the cradle, upon the parents who clutched their daughter as if to shield her from fate. Her lips curved, not in malice, but in something softer, almost wistful. "So, even now, they rush to soothe what they believe I have broken. Yet none of them see what was broken in me." Her gown shimmered as she turned away, her wings trailing shadows across the polished floor. The nobles parted before her, silent, afraid. She left the hall without another word, the echo of her footsteps swallowed by music that would not play again that night. But deep inside her chest, hidden even from herself, a question lingered. Had she cursed the child, or had she cursed herself? The forest welcomed her with silence. Tall pines whispered overhead, their needles swaying in the cool night wind. Moonlight slipped through the branches, painting silver across the mossy ground. Here, away from the brightness of the castle, the world seemed softer, yet heavier too. She walked slowly, her dark gown brushing the roots, her wings catching glimmers of moonlight like shards of broken glass. Each step carried her farther from the sound of weeping and shouting, farther from the eyes that had judged her, and deeper into the solitude that had long been her only companion. At last she reached her dwelling,
a hollow carved into the side of a hill, covered in ivy and shadow. She sank into her chair of twisted wood, leaning her head against her hand. The silence pressed close, demanding she face the storm that roared inside her heart. Had she gone too far? Her words echoed in her mind, sharper than when she had spoken them. The image of the baby's face haunted her, the innocence, the softness, the trust of a child too young to know fear. She had not cursed her to die. That was true. She had only promised her sleep, a sleep that might last a lifetime, or perhaps only until love was strong enough to break it. Yet still she felt the sting, not of guilt alone, but of doubt. Was her act justice or cruelty? She rose and crossed the room, her fingers trailing along shelves of ancient books, jars of herbs, relics of the old world. Once she had been respected for her knowledge, her wisdom. Once she had been welcomed into halls of stone and firelight. But time had turned, and with it the hearts of men. "They will call me wicked," she whispered, her voice cracking in the stillness. "They will tell stories of shadows and malice. And perhaps they are not wrong." She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of her own heart. For all her power, for all her pride, she was still only a soul longing to be remembered. And as the night deepened, she wondered if destiny itself had heard her, if the spell she cast was less a curse upon a child, and more a mirror held up to her own forgotten life.
Years drifted by like leaves upon a stream. In the kingdom, the story of the dark fairy's curse spread from mouth to mouth, changing with every telling. To the peasants, she became a monster who envied beauty. To the nobles, she was a warning against disrespecting power. To children, she was the shadow that slipped into dreams when the candle burned low. The king, desperate to save his daughter, issued a decree. All spinning wheels were to be destroyed. Fires roared in courtyards as wood and iron melted together, while mothers wept at losing the tools that clothed their families. Guards scoured cottages, dragging wheels from hearths and tossing them into piles of ash. From the forest's edge, the uninvited fairy watched. She stood cloaked beneath the trees, unseen, her heart tight in her chest. "They fear the wheel," she murmured, bitterness curling in her tone. "Yet it is not the spindle they should fear. It is the silence that forgets those left behind." At times she would wander near the castle walls, cloaking herself in mist so that no eyes could see her. She glimpsed the princess from afar, growing taller each year. The child ran through gardens with laughter, her hair catching the sun like spun gold. She was beloved by all, cherished, protected. The fairy's chest ached with a strange contradiction. She could not hate the girl. How could she? The child was innocent, radiant, a soul untouched by the pride of kings. And yet, every smile, every cheer for the princess was a reminder of what she herself had been denied. Celebration, belonging.
the simple dignity of being seen. Sometimes she whispered to the wind, as though the child might hear her, "I do not wish you harm, little one. I only wish the world would remember me as it remembers you." But the winds carried her words away, unheard. The years passed, and her name grew darker in the mouths of men. Children no longer called her the forgotten fairy. Now she was the wicked one, the curse-bearer. The stories painted her blacker with every season. And though she lived in solitude, though the forest still cradled her in its arms, she felt the weight of a truth pressing closer each day. Her spell would come due, and nothing could stop it.
The 16th year came swiftly, as all years do when one does not wish them to. The kingdom hummed with both joy and dread. On one hand, the princess had grown into a young woman of kindness and grace, adored by her people. On the other, whispers of the curse haunted every corridor, every market stall, every whispered prayer at night. The king doubled his guards. The queen lit candles in the chapel, begging the heavens for mercy. The villagers left offerings at the gates, hoping to appease the unseen hand of fate. And in the forest, the uninvited fairy kept her vigil. She watched the castle from afar, her dark cloak wrapped tight, her eyes filled with storms. 16 years ago, her anger had blazed like fire, sharp and merciless. But now that fire flickered differently. Was it guilt, regret, or simply the weight of time softening a wound that had never healed? She remembered the infant she had cursed and the young girl she had seen in the gardens. And now, somewhere behind those high walls, there was a young woman who did not know her name, except as the villain in a bedtime tale. "How cruel," she whispered into the night, her voice cracking. "Cruel that she will suffer for a slight she never gave. Cruel that I should be the villain when all I asked was to be remembered." Her wings drooped, heavy with thoughts that would not leave her. She tried to silence them, tried to remind herself it was not malice, it was justice. Yet the words rang hollow. She dreamed of undoing it. Many nights she lingered over her old tomes, fingers brushing the ink of forgotten spells. She sought some way, anyway, to soften the curse further, to weave a new thread into the tapestry of fate. But magic, once spoken, was stubborn. The more powerful the vow, the harder it was to unmake. So instead, she watched, waiting. She told herself she was not cruel. She told herself destiny would decide, not her. But deep down she knew if the girl's fate came to pass, it would be because of her. And as the days slipped by, bringing the princess closer to her 16th birthday, The fairy could no longer tell whether she longed for the curse to fail or to be fulfilled. The day dawned bright and golden, as though the sun itself wished to bless the princess's 16th birthday. Trumpets sounded from the castle towers, banners of silk rippled in the wind, and the people of the kingdom gathered to celebrate. To them it was a day of joy, though beneath every smile lingered a shadow of fear. Inside the great hall, candles burned high, and tables overflowed with fruits, pastries, and wine. The princess, radiant in a gown the color of dawn, moved gracefully among her guests. She laughed, she bowed, she danced. To see her was to believe in hope itself. But far beyond the cheering, in the hush of the forest, the uninvited fairy lingered. She stood on a rise overlooking the castle, her dark cloak drawn tightly, her heart thundering with every sound of festivity that reached her ears. "They do not see it," she murmured, her voice bitter and soft. "They think joy alone can fend off fate. They do not know how magic waits, patient as time itself." As the sun climbed higher, the fairy's unease grew heavier. Magic had a way of tightening its grip on days such as this. A spell spoken with power carried its own hunger, searching for the moment to root itself in reality. By afternoon, the celebration spilled through the castle corridors. Nobles and servants alike busied themselves with gifts and games. The princess slipped away more than once, eager for quiet corners where she could breathe. The fairy followed unseen, her form hidden in shadows, her presence cloaked in mist. She watched as the young woman explored the less traveled halls, places long forgotten by even the king's watchful eye. And then it happened. The princess paused before an old stairwell, half hidden behind a tapestry. Curiosity flickered in her eyes, a spark too bright to resist. She pulled the fabric aside and began to climb, step by step, toward the silence above. The fairy's breath caught. "No," she whispered, her hand pressing to her chest. But she did not move. She could not. The weight of her own curse held her fast, like chains she had forged with her own words 16 years ago. Higher and higher the princess climbed, her footsteps carrying her toward a destiny written long before she could choose otherwise. And the uninvited fairy, trembling in the dark, could only follow. The stairwell spiraled higher and higher, dust swirling in the faint light that seeped through cracks in the stone. The air grew colder, stiller, as though the castle itself held its breath. At last, the princess reached a narrow wooden door, worn with age and nearly forgotten. She hesitated only a moment before pressing it open. Inside, the room was small and silent. Cobwebs hung like veils, and motes of dust drifted lazily in the sunbeam from a cracked window. And there, in the center of the room, stood an old spinning wheel. Its frame gleamed faintly, as though time itself had preserved it for this very day. The princess stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is this?" she whispered to herself, reaching out a delicate hand.
In the shadows, the uninvited fairy watched, her body trembling. She wanted to cry out, to stop the girl, to sweep the wheel into flame and ash. But the curse she had spoken all those years ago bound her as surely as iron binds a prisoner. Her lips would not form the words of warning. Her feet would not cross the threshold. The princess touched the wheel, curiosity alight in her gaze. Her fingers traced the polished wood, the smooth curves of its frame. Then her hand drifted toward the spindle, sharp and waiting. "No," she breathed, a whisper no one could hear. Her wings trembled, her eyes filled with fire and sorrow. "Please, not yet." But destiny had no patience for please. The girl's finger brushed the spindle, a sharp sting like the bite of a thorn. Her lips parted in surprise, then her eyes fluttered shut. With a soft sigh, she crumpled gracefully to the floor as though drifting into the gentlest of sleeps. The fairy pressed her hand to her mouth, muffling a cry. The room seemed to darken, shadows stretching long and cold. Far below, in the great hall, the music stuttered and stopped. Whispers rose, followed by gasps, then the echoing sound of weeping as the news spread. "It has come to pass," the fairy whispered, her voice breaking. "The curse, my curse." She sank to her knees in the shadows, her wings folding around her like a shroud. For 16 years she had waited, torn between regret and pride, between bitterness and longing. And now the moment had arrived, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. But deep inside her heart a question burned like an ember. Was this truly the end, or the beginning of something yet unseen?
The silence spread like a veil across the castle. From the highest tower to the deepest cellar, time seemed to sigh and grow still. One by one the people fell where they stood, courtiers slumping in golden chairs, cooks resting by their stoves, guards lowering their heads against cold stone walls. A hush, enchanted and complete, blanketed the kingdom. The princess lay in the forgotten room, her breath soft and steady, her face serene as though she were only lost in a dream. A strand of golden hair curled across her cheek, and her hands rested gently upon her lap. From the shadows, the uninvited fairy stepped forward at last. Her dark cloak whispered against the floor as she knelt beside the girl. She studied the still face, the closed eyes, the quiet grace. No malice stirred in her heart now, only a hollow ache that seemed to echo through her bones. "I did not wish you harm," she whispered, her voice trembling, "only that the world might remember me. And now it will, but not as I hoped." Her fingers hovered above the girl's hand, aching to touch, aching to undo. Yet the curse bound her still, unyielding. All she could do was watch. Years would pass, stories would spread, a kingdom frozen in slumber, waiting for a love strong enough to break the spell. Minstrels would sing of beauty, of sorrow, of hope, and always the fairy's name would be spoken with fear. She rose, her wings brushing the air with a weary sigh. From the tower window she looked out upon the sleeping land, bathed in twilight's silver glow. And though her heart was heavy, she understood. Some stories are not written to be kind. Some are written to remind the world that shadows, too, have voices. With that, she vanished into the forest, her figure dissolving into mist, leaving behind only silence and the memory of her curse. And so the princess slept, and the kingdom with her, waiting for the day when love would come walking through their dreams. And now, dear listener, our tale comes to rest. The forest is quiet, the castle is still, and the uninvited fairy's voice fades into the night. May your own dreams be gentler. May your heart find peace in slumber, and may sleep carry you softly until morning. Close your eyes now and rest well.